Blacktooth Running Podcast, where we talk about interesting people in the sport of running. I'm Seth Kaola. In today's episode, I found two legends in the space of trail running, Dlyan Bowman and Jeremy Long. We discuss their collaboration that has created high-quality events in the western United States.
I grew up as a runner on the Oregon coast. I'm an Oregon native. I've kind of lived all over the state, but started on the coast and just grew up immersed in the trails and dunes and beach and places like that, running and exploring from an early age.
That's Jeremy Long, an ultra runner and co-founder of the racing event company Daybreak Racing.
And that translated into running in college and just kind of stubbornly trying to stay fit as an adult and a dad and a husband and you name it. I worked for 20 years at the local government level doing environmental public health work, which, long story short, translates really well to race directing, since you're basically doing a lot of safety related stuff at a community level. So I've been a full-time race director since 2019-ish, even though Daybreak was founded basically as a side gig a few years prior.
I have been a lifelong fan of sports of all different kinds. I sort of found my early calling playing the game of lacrosse, which I pursued through high school and college.
That's Dlyan Bowman, co-founder of the sports media company Free Trail and an ultra runner for Red Bull and Goldwyn.
Moved to Aspen full-time after college, and it was there that I discovered the love for endurance sports, and that obviously turned into a trail running career. Now operating as the owner, founder, leader of Free Trail, which is sort of a media and community business that also has an events element that I'm sure we'll talk about. That we started, sometime during the pandemic. We sort of had a few different chapters of our growth and evolution to this point, but it's really just been the last few years that we've been focused on it full time. Got connected with Jeremy when I was living in Portland. We've cultivated a great, not only business relationship, but friendship in the course of our few years of working together on a few different projects. We're both sort of coming out of an event production weekend, which we did here in my neighborhood about a week ago now with the inaugural Big Alta. So that's kind of a quick intro to me, sort of longtime pro athlete in the sport who's slowly and begrudgingly, reluctantly transitioning out to being, what Jeremy articulated, just sort of a recreational dad at this point. But life is good.
When I sat down to interview both Jeremy and Dlyan, I'd gathered some simple information about their partnership. They first started working together on a project called the Gorge Waterfalls 50K, and recently hosted a brand new event, the Big Alta. But in the end, I wanted to ask him the question on everyone's minds. Why did a media company decide to work with an event company, not only as a primary sponsor of a race, but also operating one as well? But first, I wanted to talk to them both on how they started running and the reasoning behind founding of their own companies.
Like anything, it makes perfect sense in hindsight. I was living in Aspen, like I said, after graduating from college. I'd been a lifelong athlete, and after I graduated from college, it was the first time in my life that I didn't have that sort of outlet of an athletic goal to chase after. And because I was living in the mountains at the time, I started running to just stay fit and to stay active. And then because I was living in the mountains, running naturally meant that I was running up and down hills quickly. I discovered the trails and mountains around Aspen, Colorado, where I was living at the time. And then just like anything else in life, when you discover something new, you create some momentum, you see yourself getting better at it. And this was right at the time when the sport was starting to explode, and things like Born to Run came out, and Anton Krupicka's blog was massively inspiring and influential for me. And because I'd had a lifelong sort of history of being an athlete, I had the discipline to sort of commit myself to this new thing. And then a few years down the line, it became more and more serious. And then here we are 15 years later, and it's been sort of the central part of my life for a long time now.
Running for me has always kind of been, at least as an adult, my adult experience as a runner has always felt like part two. I have this from, I don't know, probably age 13, middle school, when I really started getting into organized sports and started running cross country and track in high school. And we had so much immediately accessible, just open spaces and national forests and stuff to go explore. We hardly ever ran on a lot of road or track stuff unless it was, an actual track workout. So, and this was in the early 1990s. So we didn't really know that it wasn't really called trail running. We just, our workout was go run on those trails, and growing up on the coast before the internet, we had like 3 radio stations and no cable TV. So, I mean, we just sort of made it up as we went along, and we were trail runners and just didn't really know it. So, that was my first, I guess, part of my running evolution, I guess. And then I ran in college, mostly track and road stuff. And then, graduated, became a single guy, got married and had kids, and then I was basically not a runner for almost a decade. And then again, going back to that same era that Dylan was referring to, probably about 14 years ago, I needed to start running because I was not fit anymore, and I was feeling the inkling of, that aging process and not being a spring chicken anymore. So I just needed to start running. I had a coworker and a few other folks who were doing a lot of these crazy, 100 milers and 50Ks and stuff. And I just started running with them. I was kind of hooked on, especially after, reading Born to Run and getting familiar with all of these already famous races and stuff that were in existence. And I just had no awareness of it. Just kind of exploded from there, running 50Ks and, volunteering at races, and had some friends that were hosting races. And with my background, I was like, I could do that. So started hosting some unorganized events called Fat Asses, where all of a sudden, 20 people show up, and then the next year there's 120. And, it just sort of blossomed from there.
When asking about the founding of Daybreak and Free Trail, there was a name that was thrown around a lot.
I was just going to say, I think the answer is only 2 words: Ryan Thrower.
Well, that's how the two of us came to be connected. But I think Seth's question is more like, what made you want to start Daybreak? And it sounds
yeah.
We can go to that
yeah,
too.
Sorry. I misread the question. I mean, I had spent better part of 2 decades, in a job that I was trained for through college, and I was ready to move on with my life into something more satisfying. By 2016, I had started our first race called Tillamook Burn. It's half an hour from my house. Our kids were still young, so it was just going to be a fun side gig for vacation money type of deal, and sold out its first year. And then after that, I had a catalog of ideas already kind of jotted down on maps and things. So basically from that point on, we added 1 race per year. And then at the end of 2019, got my wife's sign off to basically resign from my day job and became a full-time race director, not knowing that COVID was right around the corner. But that's another story.
My story is similar. Side hustle turned main thing. When I was 33, I was sort of in the middle of my prime years as an athlete, and I was living in Colorado at the time, but had driven out to Jeremy's neck of the woods in Oregon to do a training camp in the spring to escape winter at high altitude, as I was getting ready for a island race in the Canary Islands, and broke my ankle in a unfortunate training mishap, injury, freak accident. And that spiraled me into a little bit of a midlife crisis. And it was from that midlife crisis where I started to have some self-reflection about finite nature of my athletic career and what I wanted my impact to be long-term. And that eventually led me to, just start a podcast. I've always been an audiophile. I was an early adopter of podcasts. I've been listening to Bill Simmons since like 2009, since before podcasting was this big international phenomenon. Before that, I listened to ESPN radio, just terrestrial radio for my whole life too, and had sort of the inbred love of the medium and the format. And so when I started to do it, found some momentum, and then, just the podcast became, fairly successful pretty quickly. And then I got connected with my business partner, a name that I'm sure will come up later that Jeremy just brought up, Ryan Thrower.
Spoiler.
Spoiler,
Yeah.
a great, multi-talented, creative individual. And after having him just produce my podcast for a short period of time, we just discovered that he has many more skills than just podcast production. And so he handles now all of our audio, video, photography, a lot of our graphic design work and things like that. Similarly, my wife manages most of the operations of the business. And it was really like, it sort of evolved slowly over time. At first, it was like, this is just a fun side project. And then eventually it became like, well, in order for us to really try and make this into what we think it can become, it's going to require full-time attention. And so I did something similar where I got the sign off from my wife to leave my real job at the same time that my athletic career was sort of winding down. And yeah, we've been off to the races ever since.
When Jeremy and Dylan initially crossed paths, it was for creating the event that is now Gorge Waterfalls. But for both of them, it seemed like it wasn't on their minds originally, especially helping them grow their companies. So you kind of already mentioned how you guys met each other. Obviously, Jeremy using the 2 words.
I skipped a question, sorry.
No, it's okay. That's totally fine. We could talk about how you guys decided to collaborate. Obviously, you talked about how Ryan Thrower was kind of the person to get you connected, but what was kind of the driving force to start Free Trail and Daybreak Racing working together, especially on something like what you just did, the Big Alta?
All right, I'll take this. And then Jeremy, you fill in the gaps because I'm interested to hear this too. So from my memory, so I was living in Portland at the time. My wife and I moved there right before COVID, ended up living in the Portland area for about 3 years, which is where my wife grew up. This was right around the time that I just described, where we were starting to think a lot more seriously and in a much bigger way about what Free Trail could be and what it could become. At this point, we weren't even operating under the name Free Trail. My business partner, Ryan, who lives in Seattle full time, said, or he was back and forth between Seattle and Portland a lot as we were working on some various content projects. And he and Jeremy had been in touch, and Ryan sort of brought the idea to me of like, what if we collaborated with Daybreak on doing an event of some kind? And my immediate reaction was like, no, man, like we're not race directors. We don't know how to do that stuff. Like we've got enough going on. Let's leave that to the professionals. And anyway, he was very passionate about it, and I felt that immediately and in subsequent conversations. And then yeah, he put Jeremy and I together. I remember, Jeremy, we met at what's the name of that bakery in St. John's? Sparrow. We met at Sparrow
Yep.
Bakery. And you gave me a little bit more of the pitch, and then we triangulated towards eventually acquiring Gorge Waterfalls. Jeremy, what did I miss there?
I mean, that's sort of the gist. I think we very originally met in person at our Mount Hood race back in, was it before COVID or was it right after? It might have been right after. You guys came, and because I think it was partially, I'd known Ryan for a few years. He had kind of, jumped in to see if he could shoot some races, over, 2018, 2019. That's kind of how we met. And then through Instagram. I just admired a lot of his content. I think Ryan convinced you to come out to Y East and do like a production day, make some content, do a little hype, reel and stuff for the event, which ended up being pretty cool because there were a ton of people that were just, starstruck. It's Dlyan Bowman. So that was pretty cool. And I think maybe my sense was that once you kind of, I don't know, maybe saw that and then got a little evidence that we weren't, that we had our thing together from a race directing standpoint. I was immediately getting messages from Ryan and calls about, I think we should host a race. And my response was, well, where would you want to do it? And he's like, well, what about the Gorge? And then that kind of just led to us having that meetup and just chatting about, well, this hasn't ever been done before that I'm aware of, but I mean, with your strengths and our strengths, we could make this thing bigger than anything anywhere around here. and then it just immediately became true.
Joining us today, welcome to the Columbia River Gorge. We've got fun quarters lined up for you. Good morning, everybody. So happy you're all here. This here is Deborah Buchanan. She is my mother-in-law, a fantastic poet, and she has written a poem for you all.
Before continuing, Dylan and Jeremy provided me some insight into what Gorge Waterfalls was and what it is now.
Yeah, so Seth, just for your understanding and for the listeners, then what happened next was we ended up acquiring the Gorge Waterfalls race, which had been around but had been canceled for several years in a row following a fire in the Columbia River Gorge. We resuscitated it and brought it back for the first time in 2022. And
Yep.
And so now we've done Gorge twice, and we just did the Big Alta for the first time. So we've now collaborated on 3 total events.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that it was a previous race before. I thought you guys created it. So that's an awesome insight.
It's fairly functionally a new event. We moved a lot of the staging areas in a different location. The course progression's much different. All of the branding is different. We did keep the name, and most of the trails are basically the same. Functionally, it's from a marketing and awareness perspective, it's a new event. It's much larger now than it ever was, even though it was a big event back in the day.
I then asked them both the question that I was most curious about. What makes this partnership work so well? As all of the races that have been done by the two have been incredibly successful. Jeremy had an interesting response to this question.
Well, I mean, it's probably subjective. A lot of folks would define the ideal race as being with 25 people in it. With no production, necessarily at all. With our races, we're obviously it's a for-profit venture, so we're in it to provide for our livelihoods and support our families and ourselves. With trail, that's a specifically challenging accomplishment to realize, because the nature of trail is it's single track. You can only fit so many people on it at one particular time. So strategically finding race courses and venues that can sustain, a significant number of runners and, a significant level of production to kind of go with that, is unique to our partnership. We want to provide something that's a high production value for a large group of people, for one, because we need it to in order for it to be worth our investment, but then also that's where we see the sport going, and it's from our perspective and feedback, that's what people want. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would just add specifically about what makes the relationship between Free Trail and Daybreak work. I think I've been lucky actually in that with all the people that I work with professionally now, it's sort of been a coincidental collision that's brought us together. For example, with Ryan, my business partner, I just feel really fortunate that I met him when I did, and that we were both in the right place at the right time to sort of build something together. And then, we also have a partner who does a lot of our software stuff named Travis, who's similarly just like this undiscovered, really talented person. And then, when Jeremy and Daybreak and Free Trail sort of came together, it did feel like this seamless integration where it was like, Jeremy had already had this history in the Pacific Northwest of providing a lot of great racing opportunities for that regional community. And we were sort of finding our footing as sort of a US based, but hopefully global trail running media entity. One of the majorly important parts of our operation is our community side of things, and races are a great opportunity to bring a community together. And I think that's why Ryan was enamored with this idea to begin with, and why it seemed to work out so well, is that, Jeremy and Aaron, his brother and partner, and the rest of the team that helps out on the Daybreak side bring operational excellence that we don't understand at all. And then, what free trail brings is, a little bit more of that public facing energy, marketing, community relationships and things like that are, I think, a lot more surface level, where Jeremy handles like the things that have depth and consequence to them. He describes it as the relationship mullet, which I'll let him expand on here soon. But yeah, I think it's been beneficial.
Very simple.
Yeah, I think it's been beneficial to both of us, and that, yeah, for that obvious reason is like we let Daybreak handle the stuff that they're uniquely qualified to handle, and similarly they trust us to handle the stuff that we're good at.
As far as new experiences, I think that Free Trail deserves probably most of the credit on that from that perspective. I mean, we host races. We're proud of the level of organization and the production and the value and the quality that we bring to it. But to take it to this level and create this just tight community vibe where it literally is a reunion for hundreds of people, that's what Free Trail brings to it, and it's what we want to do. But I would need 20 people to do the work that the 3 people at Free Trail are doing super well, and living it. And so I mean, there's those intangibles are the things that Dylan and Ryan and Harmony bring to it, that it's the frosting to the cake. It's not a cake if it's just the spongy stuff or the frosting, but when they're together, you've got this just perfect dessert.
Dylan also had some interesting stuff to add along the idea of trail community, which is a core part of Free Trails' business.
Yeah, I would just add that I think for anybody who's been to a trail race, just how fun and special those experiences are. And I think for both Jeremy and I, being on both sides of it has been life-changing, running races ourselves, and then also being there to support people and their racing goals is also equally, if not more, rewarding, and certainly more hard. I know one of the things that I've come to appreciate is just the difficulty of race directing and how, it really is a confluence of like a million different factors that need to fall into place on a specific date in order to make it a positive experience. And we're just coming out of one of the big Alta that everything that we couldn't control pretty much fell in our direction, but we've also been on the opposite side where it just seems like, man, we just got bad luck this year. And it's just like anything else in life where you just have to kind of learn to ride those highs and lows. But even when it's, seemingly you're not getting the good luck, they're still rewarding experiences in their own way. And I don't know, I think I've just come to have a much deeper appreciation of what it takes to be a race director in this sport. And as Jeremy said, like, it's still a niche sport. It's not easy to make a living in trail running.
I decided to ask one more question relating to the Big Alta, the inaugural running of which happened a week prior to the recording of this podcast. The Big Alta was Daybreak's first time outside the Pacific Northwest, creating a race in Dylan's backyard of Marin County, California. You were talking about the Big Alta and Gorge Waterfalls and stuff like that. Obviously, you kind of talked about it a little bit. If you guys want to do kind of a race recap of how that went and what you learned about, especially doing your first event in California.
I'll start with this one. So the Big Alta was an idea that sort of came about not long after I had relocated from the Portland area where Jeremy lives down to where I live now, which is in Marinwood. And the race course passes by my house, literally like a minute jog away is the final descent on the Big Alta course. And anyway, we'd always sort of had these ideas of doing a second event. And because of the fact that I had relocated, it made sense to broaden our horizons. And anyway, again, like I said, it was a spectacular inaugural running. It was, I had a feeling that we had something special with the Big Alta, just like knowing the trails and running on them daily myself, but you're never sure that it's really what you envision until you have that moment of truth of bringing hundreds of people together to do it together on a specific date. And, I think it surpassed all of our expectations. It certainly, made me incredibly happy and proud to see so many people here in my neighborhood having a really special racing experience themselves. And, yeah, I think, like I just said, all the things that we couldn't really control, the universe sort of aligned to make those things fall in our direction. And we're grateful for that. And we certainly know that in the future, you can't always bank on that being the case, but we benefited from that happening here for the Big Alta. And, yeah, anyway, just really happy and proud and still pretty exhausted from the whole thing.
Echoing what Dylan said, it exceeded all of our expectations. It was more work than I anticipated. Not only because it was, by far the farthest event we've ever, planned to host. But it was an inaugural race is always more work than any subsequent year. And I knew that going in, and that this was going to be an investment, but it was worth it because after, meeting Dylan down where he lives now and running the course, seeing the park, interacting with people down there, I knew that we were definitely onto something. And as long as we had a decent weather day, it was going to take care of itself, by the time the race came. And again, we had superb weather, and, Dylan's neighbors ran, for goodness sakes. I mean, it was everything from neighbors to literally people in every corner of the US and Canada and a handful of other countries. And everyone said the exact same thing, that, this just is incredible and a breath of fresh air, and, kind of every little kind of positive note that you can think of. It was really cool to experience and be on the receiving end of that after the investment that we've made. So, yeah.
One of the core pieces of feedback that Jeremy's getting at here that I'm sure we both fielded, but certainly that I saw a bunch in my DMs and emails, was that this is what I think we go for, even if we haven't explicitly stated it to ourselves or outwardly, is that it felt like a good mix between a super high production race and like a super grassroots race. And I think that's like a huge compliment personally. Like that feels like exactly what I would want.
Yep.
It's the Big Alta and Gorge Waterfalls to feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you guys so much. I know we're slowly running out of time here for the Zoom 40-minute time limit, but I'd just like to say thank you guys sincerely. That this has been awesome. This was obviously a fever dream of mine to possibly interview you guys for this podcast, so I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on, Seth. It was good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Look at you podcasting, man. Keep going, Seth. Thanks for
Thank you.
Man.
Thank
Just
you.
need to find yourself a Ryan thrower, and you'll be set.
Yeah, you gotta upgrade to the paid Zoom membership.
Yeah, I do. That would be step number 2 here in the podcast journey.
There you go.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you,
Good
guys.
job, buddy. Thanks.
Thanks, Ed. Bye.
The Blacktooth Running Podcast is hosted by myself and produced by Blacktooth Productions. Visit blacktoothrunningcompany.com/production to learn more. Special thanks to Dylan and Jeremy for allowing me to interview them for this episode. You can follow Dylan on X, Instagram, Threads, and other platforms at DylanBow. You can follow Jeremy on the same platforms at JLonghorn. You can also follow Dylan's company Free Trail at Run Free Trail, and Jeremy's Daybreak Racing at Daybreak Racing. If you're interested in both companies, visit freetrail.com and daybreakracing.com for more information. Thank you for listening, and take care.